2019, when health officials in China admitted they had a problem.
This is kind of interesting. It's good? You guys want it? Okay, fuck it.
Have activated them.
China admitted they had a problem.
Health authorities have activated the most serious response level
after an outbreak of a new type of viral pneumonia
in central China.
A rapidly growing number of people were developing a dry cough and fever before getting pneumonia.
I pause it, yes, I pause it.
And for some, it turned fatal. Doctors have named the disease COVID-19, or coronavirus disease 2019, indicating that a type of virus is causing the illness. When they tried to trace its origin, they found a likely source: this food market in Wuhan. Out of the first 41 patients, 27 had been here. It wasn't conclusive evidence, but Chinese officials quickly shut down the market. They had seen this happen before, at a place just like this.
The health officials are trying to get a grip on an alarming outbreak of SARS.
The virus originated in mainland China.
Has spread across the country.
The disease had been festering for months in southern China.
In 2002, a coronavirus had emerged at a very similar market in southern China. It eventually reached 29 countries and killed nearly 800 people. Now, 18 years later, this coronavirus is in at least 71 countries and has already killed over 3,100 people. So what do these markets have to do with the coronavirus outbreak, and why is it happening in China?
Chat, I have a question. Let's say we lived in a world where China would be so negligent, this would occur time and time again, and you could track that they're doing almost nearly deliberately. Would anybody just say, okay, fuck it, boys, nobody travel to China, nobody comes, fuck it, dude, like everybody just like that, and everybody just, you know?
A lot of the viruses that make us sick actually originate in animals. Some of the viruses that cause the flu come from birds and pigs. HIV/AIDS comes from chimpanzees. The deadly Ebola virus likely originates in bats. And in the case of the 2019 coronavirus, there's some evidence it went from a bat to a pangolin before infecting a human. While viruses are very good at jumping between species, it's rare for a deadly one to make this journey all the way to humans. That's because it would need all these hosts to encounter each other at some point. That's where the Wuhan market comes in. It's a wet market. A kind of place where live animals are slaughtered and sold for consumption.
Many scientists.
Peter Lee is a professor and expert on China's animal trade.
The cages stack about one over another. Animals at the bottom are often soaked with all kinds of liquid, animal excrement, pus, blood, or whatever the liquid they're receiving from the animals above.
That's exactly how a virus can jump from one animal to another. If that animal then comes in contact with or is consumed by a human, the virus could potentially infect them.
Okay, I have a question, chat. This might sound really weird. Why the fuck do they have bats? What the fuck is that to do with bats, dude?
Infect them.
They eat the fucking bats?
And if the virus then spreads to other humans,
aren't those flying rats?
Causes an outbreak. Wet markets are scattered all over the world, but the ones in China are particularly well known because they offer a wide variety of animals, including wildlife. This is a sample menu reportedly from the market in Wuhan. These animals are from all over the world, and each one has the potential to carry its own viruses to the market. The reason all these animals are in the same market is because of a decision China's government made decades ago. Back in the 1970s, China was falling apart. Famine had killed more than 36 million people, and the communist regime, which controlled all food production, was failing to feed its more than 900 million people. In
they weren't naked,
on the verge of collapse, the regime gave up this control and allowed private farming. While large companies increasingly dominated the production of popular foods like pork and poultry, some smaller farmers turned to catching and raising wild animals as a way to sustain themselves.
Turtles.
At the very beginning, it was mostly peasant household backyard operation of turtles, for example. That's how wildlife farming started to get off the ground.
And since it started to feed and sustain people, the Chinese government backed it.
So it was imperative for the government to encourage people to, to make a living through whatever productive activities they can find themselves in. So you can lift yourself out of poverty. No matter what you are doing, that's okay.
But then in 1988, the government made a decision that changed the shape of wildlife trade in China. They enacted the Wildlife Protection Law, which designated the animals as resources owned by the state and protected people engaged in the utilization of wildlife resources.
This is interesting.
That's one of the most devastating problems of the law, because if you designate the wildlife as a natural resource, that means it is something you can use for human benefits.
The law also encouraged the domestication and breeding of wildlife. And with that, an industry was born. Small local farms turned into industrial-sized operations.
Raccoons!
For example, this bear farm started with just 3
bears,
and eventually grew to more than 1,000 bears. Bigger populations meant greater chances that a sick animal could spread disease. Farmers were also raising a wide variety of animals, which meant more viruses on the farms. Nonetheless, these animals were funneled into the wet markets for profit.
Peacocks.
While this legal wildlife farming industry started booming, it simultaneously provided cover for an illegal wildlife industry. Endangered animals like tigers, rhinoceroses, and pangolins were trafficked into China.
Cool,
By
man.
the early 2000s, these markets were teeming with wild animals when the inevitable happened.
The latest on the deadly SARS virus, the worldwide death toll up again today.
China has reported more than 1,400 cases of infection nationwide.
It is what health officials have feared all along.
In 2003, the SARS outbreak was traced to a wet market here in southern China. Scientists found traces of the virus in farmed civet cats. Chinese officials quickly shut down the markets and banned wildlife farming. But just a few months after the outbreak, the Chinese government declared 54 species of wildlife animals, including civet cats, legal to farm again.
Wait a minute.
Wildlife animals, including civet cats, legal to farm again. By 2004, the wildlife farming industry was worth an estimated 100 billion yuan, and it exerted significant influence over the Chinese government.
Wildlife farming industry was tiny in China's gigantic GDP, but the industry has enormous lobbying capability.
It's because of this influence that the Chinese government has allowed these markets to grow over the years. In 2016, for example, the government sanctioned the farming of some endangered species like tigers and pangolins. By 2018, the wildlife industry had grown to 148 billion yuan and had developed clever marketing tactics to keep the markets around.
The industry has been promoting these wildlife animals as tonic products, as bodybuilding, as sex enhancing, and of course as disease fighting. None of the claims can hold water.
Yet these products became popular with an influential portion of China's population.
The majority of the people in China do not eat wildlife animals. Those people who consume these wildlife animals are the rich and the powerful, a small minority.
It's this minority that the Chinese government chose to favor over the safety of the rest of its population.
These parochial commercial interests of small number of wildlife eaters are hijacking China's national interest.
Chat.
Soon after the coronavirus
Chat.
outbreak,
I have a question, chat. When the rich and powerful have like a lot of money and power, isn't there cooler and more hip shit to do than eating tigers did? Isn't there like other cool shit you could do with your time and money?
the Chinese government shut down thousands of wet markets and temporarily banned wildlife trade again. Organizations around the world have been urging China to make the ban permanent. Chinese social media, in particular, has been flooded with petitions to ban it for good this time. In response, China is reportedly amending the wildlife protection law that encouraged wildlife farming decades ago. But unless these actions lead to a permanent ban on wildlife farming, outbreaks like this one are bound to happen again.
Come on.
For a bunch more information about China's wet markets, viruses, and wildlife,
chat.
Hello, Mr. Felix PVC.
Listen, where's the GDP?
Are you listening?
The GDP, where's it at?
I only have one request. Here it is. Can you play the I Follow You song? Pretty please.
I'll play it in a minute.
Oh, and finite later.
No.
Hopers finite later.
Okay. Chat. At which point do countries that are not China have a say in, like, yo, dude, chill with that, without jeopardizing or without, like, what, like, the piece of the pie that they get out of their trades with them, right? They can't do shit, right? don't people have like a moral obligation to be like, yo, dude? Yeah, dude, we do trades and we make money with each other, dude, but can we not do that? They can't do that, can they not? Then how do people pressure the countries to be rational or to be compliant with the rest of the world? Sanctions. I'm learning, dude. I'm learning today. They can't. They don't. Stop trading. Yeah, but dude, it's capitalism. I'm not even trying to be like a capitalist NA lol, but that's just kind of like capitalism, dude. Like, nobody's gonna realistically jeopardize a big deal that they're doing for a reduced potential risk of random potential virus ever being created somehow. Because we're humans, dude. It's not there. Like, it's not, you know, we don't do shit when it's not boom. We're just kind of stupid. Right. No one cares? I actually think I care a lot.
Why the fuck is her neck thicker than her thighs? What lab did she crawl out of?
Lobbying.
Alright. That was pretty good. What is that?
Why don't you...
Chat, I like Vox sometimes because they're very interesting videos. The problem that I have is that they're politically biased. Sometimes I try to like not listen to like their political ideology on some things because I need to like separate the information and the data from their interpretation, which is fucking annoying. It sucks because they make good content, but it's biased. So it's kind of like, come on, man. Like, I'm trying to watch some good shit here, dude. This is good.
Describe for me as vividly as you can.
Okay, alt-right. How am I alt-right?
What it is that...
I don't know what that means.
Fortunately, there's very few things, and most of them are very low probability. You know, some big volcanic explosion, gigantic earthquake, asteroid.
7 months.
Well, at least in the nuclear case, you've got to say we take it quite seriously. We budget a lot of money, have a lot of people who think about nuclear deterrence, and I'm very glad that work's being done. And I rate the chance of a nuclear war in my lifetime as being fairly low.
I've tested positive.
I rate the chance of a widespread epidemic far worse than Ebola in my lifetime is well over 50%.
Last question, I promise. Is it a filming style to have a low FPS here?
Chance of a nuclear war
low
in my
frames
lifetime
camera?
is being
Is it
fairly
like a cool
low.
style?
I rate the chance of a widespread epidemic far worse than Ebola in my lifetime is well over 50%. If we look at the 20th century and we look at the death chart of the 20th century, I think everybody would say, oh yeah, there must be a spike for World War I. You know, sure enough, there it is, like 25 million. And there must be a big spike for World War II, and there it is, it's like 65 million. But then you'll see this other spike that is as large as World War II right after World War I. And most people, a lot of people would say, well, what? What was that? There's two kinds of flus. There's flus that spread between humans very effectively, and there's flus that kill lots of people.
Jesus.
And those two properties have only been combined into a widespread flu once in history. Well, that is Spanish flu. We have no idea where it came from. It's called the Spanish flu because the Spanish press was the...
I'm not kidding you, we have to. Just kind of how it is. Yo, guys, I've had problems with that before.
And that work has been phenomenal in helping us target our polio eradication resources and, you know, which parts of Nigeria should we work harder on. And it's very natural, if you have a group like that, to say, hey, look at something like the Spanish flu in the modern day. Health systems are far better. And so you think, hey, that wouldn't be very bad. Well, we tried it, and there are some assumptions we had to make. But what we showed is that the force of infection because of modern transport, which compared to 1918 is over 50 times as great. And so if you get something like a flu, and you look at that map of how within days it's basically in all urban centers of the entire globe, that is very eye-opening. That didn't happen with Spanish flu in the past.
Hold on, okay, so we could see. Fuck, man. This camera is really annoying.
The opportunity to do more than just let it run its course is really only in the last decade. Basically, when you talk about drugs, you can talk about small molecules or talk about these complex biological protein-like things, of which there's a subclass called antibodies. Antibodies are the molecules that the immune system naturally builds to attack disease. Today, the idea that somebody says, oh, here's an antibody, make a lot of it, make it very quickly, that's right on the cutting edge. And the Ebola epidemic showed me that we're not ready for a serious epidemic, an epidemic that would be more infectious and would spread faster than Ebola did. This is the greatest risk of a huge tragedy. This is the most likely thing by far to kill over 10 million excess people in a year. We don't need to invest nearly what we do in military preparedness. This is something where less than $1 billion a year on R&D, medical surveillance, standby personnel, cross-training the military so they can play a role in terms of all the logistics here. This can be done, and we may not get many more warnings like this one to say, okay, it's a pretty modest investment to avoid something that really, in terms of the human condition, would be a gigantic setback.
This chat did not. Okay.
For at least 2 weeks, delivery and carry out still okay.
Dude, I'm not ordering anything to take out.
Happy 10 months.
Food.
Oh, you thought I was gonna spam LW
Yeah.
or 7?
Yeah, I thought
well,
you...
joke's on you, I'm not like these guys.
Yeah, man.
Oh my god.